Mr. Njai has said, he has given us the responsibility to introduce ourselves. But I shall not do that for long. I'll just tell you my name. My name is Ousainou Ngum. Originally, I am a trained chartered accountant, but I have not worked in finance for the last 30 years. I have been working on social transformation. And the reason I chose to do that is that I want to fashion myself to be a continuous learner. And in that sense, I am a member of your academy. I fashion myself to learn on a continuous basis. So I'm in the same place as you, even though I'm giving you a lecture. I am hoping that by the time I'm through, with the lecture, I would have learned a few things myself and imparted some knowledge onto yourselves as well. So on that basis, I say good morning to you all, and I dive into the subject so that I can maximize my 30 minutes. Now, my subject today is integrity. And I want to come at it from a very different angle to allow all of us to learn about integrity in a different way. So my definition of integrity will be about the discovery of oneself. Basically, our intuition as human beings is to have integrity. We're all disposed to have integrity. But it's through our journey along the way that we either become people of integrity or we don't. Now, to identify persons of integrity, there are usually manifestations that tell you a lot about people with integrity, and they center around a number of things. One of which is principle. The second is character. The third one is the image. The fourth one is about oneness. The fifth is commitment. The other is compliance, and the other one is power. Now, I will break all of this down and demonstrate how, in looking at these values, one can identify persons of integrity or persons without integrity. Now, if we go to the value of principle, now, you will often see that people with high levels of principle tend to want to do things that are right as opposed to things that are popular. They tend to want to identify it with what is right as opposed to what is popular as a value. The second one is that they try to make the right decisions even against the wind. No matter what the pressure is, no matter what's around them, their focus tends to be on wanting to make the right decision. The other value you tend to see is consistency. They align their actions with their values. So whatever they do, you can identify it with their values. Their actions always align with their values neatly. They're often very predictable. You can often determine which way they're going to go. Because they're driven by a particular value, by a particular principle, by a particular belief. So you can always predict which way they're going to go. And they're usually very reliable. They're very reliable people. You can always tell, that these are people I can count on because I more or less know where they're going to land. So they're people you can relate to often. Now, they're people who always see the future in the seed. They see the future in the values that drive them. So basically, for them, the value is in the seed and not inside the seed. So if you plant a seed, the seed grows into a tree, the tree flowers, and it delivers for you. So their focus is on that. Their focus is usually on the long term. They recognize that the long term is what delivers the result. And it's very interesting that we have Mr. Salah as my co-speaker. And one of these things around principle, he demonstrated quite well in the 2016 impasse, because his focus was on the result. So when he was asked the question, is Jammeh going to go? Will Jammeh do this? Will Jammeh do that? His position was that Jammeh is no longer relevant. What is relevant is January 19th. And whatever action he takes on January 19th defines him. He either becomes a rebel or he complies. Now that was very powerful because he did not get involved in the talk and the chatter around it. He just focused on the end result. And that principle helps you do that. You define the core result. What is the core value? Where are we going? And that is a manifestation of integrity because you stick to what is expected. What was expected is that we have a constitution, it defines who becomes our leader, how he becomes our leader, at what time, and he just connects with that. And through that, he was able to pull along quite a number of people who connected with that. So that's what principle helps you do. The next value is about character. Now, characters are very interesting because characters are always recognizable. If you can imagine the characters A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, everybody recognizes them. They're always recognizable, they're constant. Now, people with integrity come across like that. They come across like characters. They're very constant, you can always recognize them. They're always very dependable. I mean, you can depend on your numbers because they're not going to change. Your numbers are constant, they are what they are, they're never going to change. They're always very reliable, and they're good executors. Now, I want to take a test of the audience here and ask you a very difficult question. And I know statistically what my answer is going to be, but I will test it in any way. If you just lift your hand, how many of you have ever told a lie? You know, you've lied about something. How many of you? Okay. Not a very high number. Now I can safely say that probably the entire room, bar one or two, have told a lie. But it has been tested. Statistically, human nature is such that only 12% of us are executors in the true sense. In that only 12% of us will always do what we say. We'll always deliver what we mean. And those are the people of integrity. So in effect, persons of integrity in any society would be just 12% of us. And this has been statistically tested. That's why I deliberately asked you that question. People who will do on a daily basis, in and out, what they say, will only be 12% all of the time. Now, the word integrity comes from the Latin word integra. And what integra means is a whole, something that's complete. Now, the easiest example I can give you is a pizza. You know, a pizza is round and it's a whole. But the moment you chip away at it, you remove part of it. Now, for you to be a person of integrity, you've got to be that pizza. You've got to remain a whole all of the time, everywhere, in every circumstance. And that's not very easy. That's why it says only 12% of us will ever achieve that. And that's why I want to deliver the talk centered around us as individuals. To be a person of integrity, you've got to define integrity around yourself. You've got to be constantly asking yourself the question. Like I said earlier, we're all disposed to be persons of integrity. So if you tell a lie, you will not be comfortable. If you're doing something wrong, you will not be comfortable. If you're stealing, you will not be comfortable. Now the battle is, how do you constantly pull yourself towards not stealing, towards not telling a lie, towards doing the right thing? That's what gives you integrity. That's what defines you as a person. That's what gives you identity. Now the wave may be going the other way, but you need to look into the mirror constantly and pull yourself on the other side. And that is what will pull you towards integrity. And that is very important around your image. What image do you portray as an individual? Is it a constant image? Can people safely say, this is what we expect of Mr. X or Mr. Y? Are you the same person all of the time, driven by your values, driven by your beliefs? Or are you a variable person? Now, one thing that's very common nowadays with movie actors and people of high standing and popular. They hire image consultants. And what do the image consultants do? They model them to represent a particular image. But they don't model them to represent the image of who they are. Now again, Mr. Salah will excuse me. I often use him as a constant example. Wherever you see him, he dons a white kaftan. I mean, that's an image. He's trying to define an image of simplicity. Now, it's an image he chooses. So wherever you call him, whether it's a presidential reception, whether it's a small party, it doesn't matter for him. He has an image. And he's worried about being constant about that image. Now, it's a very powerful message. It's a message of humility. It's a message of simplicity. So that he doesn't put anybody under pressure to wear a three-tie suit, or a big waramba. And to acquire that, you need money. You need to find the money to buy it. So he's saying, my means are limited, so I'm going to make sure that everything I do presents an image of a limited person with limited resources. So that is what integrity can do for you, because he's saying, I don't want to worry about buying a suit every time I go to a meeting, or things like that. And that's very powerful for you young people, because fashion and style pushes you into so many things. New glasses, new shirts, new trousers. You don't necessarily have to. You don't necessarily have to. And that's a message he's trying to communicate through the way he brings himself by the outfits he wears. I'm sorry, Mr. Salah, for citing you on that one. Now, another one is thinking about yourself less and thinking about other people more. I mean, this is very, very important. And I'm not saying thinking less of yourself. You don't have to think less of yourself. You can think big about yourself, but always try to think more about people and think less of yourself. Because what that then does, it gives you context. It makes you understand what's around you. Again, a very good example of that was during the impasse, when everybody was running away to go to Dakar. I remember Mr. Salah saying, no, I'm going to stay with the people to deliver a cause. Now that's very powerful. The message he was giving was that I'm not thinking about myself. Because the imminent danger was around the leaders, not around individuals. But his message was, I'm sticking around to ensure I am with the people to fight the battle. Again, it's a sign of integrity. You think more about the people and less about yourself. It doesn't mean that you think less of yourself. The power of that is that the people will think more of you. They'll think highly of you eventually because they'll recognize and associate with the action you've taken. Now, and always remember, the journey to success is not an I. The journey to success is a we. To be successful, you need to carry along a lot of people and be with a lot of people. So your journey to success can never be an I. Whenever you see a portrayal of I, be concerned. That's not a demonstration of integrity. It needs to be about we. We need to be able to carry along ourselves to build anything sustainable. Anything that stands alone will not stand alone for long. So that journey has to be a we journey, not an I journey. Now, and the reason I say that is that in the modern era, we are posed very fundamental character challenges by virtue of social media. Now, when you go to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or TikTok, often people post what they want you to perceive them as, rather than what they are. Now, that's a fundamental challenge for those of you in this room. And it is transforming society in very fundamental ways. I mean, when we were young, there was nothing like fake news. There was nothing like deliberate targeting for messaging. Those things weren't happening, but they're happening today because your generation is facilitating that. Every time you think you have a good news story, Facebook, TikTok, that's where you go. When you have a bad news story, when you have a real life story, you don't process it. All of a sudden, you find that you have no one to process it with. And what do? Maybe at the most extreme, commit suicide or do something like that. Now, this is a big challenge that you guys need to face, which is to actually run against the rhythm of social media and find another medium for communicating to ensure that there's realism in our lives. rather than an artificial take on life. And this poses fundamental challenges to questions of integrity. And my good example of this is the former US President, Donald Trump. It got to a point where nobody was worried about his integrity, which was quite flawed in everything he did, but it didn't become important anymore. His value as a news item became more important. His value as a news story became more. Now, that's a very distorted view of the world. And that is the danger you run in terms of having values of integrity. So it's very important to understand that you need to pose your life on very solid grounds of reality. What is my reality? How do I work through life in a very realistic and sustainable manner? Because some of the things we do around social media are not sustainable. Over time, you will be demasked. And it's very important to do that. Now, the best way for us to understand integrity in a sort of cascaded manner is around the question of faith. For those of us who are Muslim or Christian, or even for those who do not believe, you're connected to a particular idea. I either believe in the oneness of God or I don't. And either way you go, it drives how you relate to people, how you relate to society, and how you do things. But accepting the principle of oneness in whatever way you do it is a manifestation of character. And often when you find people who are genuinely faith-driven, they do it well. When you find people who are genuinely not driven by faith, but driven by values, they do it well. Now the question is, whichever way you go, it's how you internalize that as an individual. What is your truth that drives you? And how do you exhibit it? Again, it's a missing value in our society. I mean, often when you go to a mosque on Friday, it's packed. When you go to a church on Sunday, it's packed. Take the same person out of a mosque and put them in the context of serving society, and they are the most devious. But they do not relate the two at any point. For them, going to church is an action, going to work is an action. Now, your generation has a chance to change that, to inculcate yourselves in values that are self-questioning. You interrogate yourself in every action you take. Why am I doing X? Faith is a sign of completeness in terms of respecting others, delivering to a society, supporting the values of constructing a society, so on and so forth. That's what fundamentally it's about. Of course, there are religious determinants that guide you on how to do that. But it's about why am I doing it in terms of myself as a person, not just the act of going to a mosque or going to a church. It's about why am I doing that. That is extremely critical for yourselves. Now, commitment. Being committed to your values, being committed to your cause, being committed to fairness, being committed to equity, questions of equity, and being committed to inclusiveness. Now, Mr. Salah is going to talk about commitment, so I won't go into it much. But this is the area where societies break down. When a society is not inclusive, when a society is not equitable, when a society does not value itself and one another, it breaks down. When you live in a society and you don't have a cause as an individual or a cause as a nation, it will break down. So as young leaders coming up, you need to identify a cause. You need to understand that to build a sustainable society, it has to be inclusive. There has to be values of equity. So every Gambian in Gambian society should have equal chance of success, should have equal access, should have equal opportunity. And it's up to us as Gambians as a whole to ensure we build a society that affords us that possibility, so that everybody sees themselves as a valuable member, as an equal member of the society. How you go about achieving that might have challenges, might be different. But if you are driven by values of integrity, base values, then you will get there. But the responsibility lies on all of us. And we must stop thinking that it lies with the leaders only. We eventually make the leaders. The leaders get elected from amongst us. So if we cultivate those values as we grow, as we come along, When we eventually get there, we will deliver them. If we cultivate alternative values, when we get there, we will deliver alternative values. So it's not about the leaders. The leaders are, government in that sense is more or less irrelevant. If the society is driven by values and asks for it, government will inevitably do it. But if we look to them to do it, then we may spend a long time looking. And it's really important that we drive that message across society, that it's about us. We end up being the leaders. We end up taking responsibility. So if we prepare ourselves the right way, when we eventually get there, we will know exactly what we need to deliver. Now, like I said, commitment, I live. Now, compliance. Being compliant. Now, in the societies we live today, we have accepted that we are going to be guided by certain core principles. In the Gambia, having a constitution, having laws that govern us, and having a social construct. Our cultures, our norms. How do we coexist? How do we live together? And trying through that to build a peaceful, lasting, and sustainable society. Now again, we have a constitution. We have agreed that this is how our lives are going to be governed. This is how our lives are going to be guided. So if you are aspiring to be a person of integrity, you need to respect the principles in that document, which defines who is Gambian, how do you exist in this society, how do you get access to your rights, how do you get government to give you basic social protection, so on and so forth. Now the responsibility to understand that and demand it is ours. That is where integrity begins. And again, I'll give you an example of Mr. Salah. I myself often accuse him of being boring because his answers are standard. But it is deliberate on his part. He's trying to say the only fair instrument that governs us is our constitution and our laws. So I am not going to do anything that is against them. Even though the popular drive is for me to do that, I will not do it. And the impasse, again, was another classic example. At no point was he derogatory to Jammeh. He wasn't. He refused to be derogatory to Jammeh. He respected him as president until the 19th of January when he termed him a rebel, at which point he was a rebel. And that is because he was trying to communicate this message of we are constitutionally driven. We're a nation with laws. We should be bound by our laws. So if you want to be a person of integrity, you must try and understand those laws and operate with those laws. I often have conversation with friends when they're complaining about government and say, nothing is, and I say, there's something called public interest litigation. And what that tries to do is to promote within society the ability to take on your own governors, the people who are delivering what your constitution, to task, without being violent and without being disrespectful. Now again, if you are value-based, if you are driven by your values, these are the things you do. These are the things you promote. Mr. Tal is a classic example of that. He often tries to resort to that and communicate a message of, you don't necessarily have to wait for government to give it to you. You have a responsibility in it. And as young leaders, values of integrity is not just about being straight and being honest all of the time. It's also about taking responsibility for your fellow Gambians. Because not all of us will have access to that sort of material. Not all of us will understand it. But if you go back to what I said before, think less of yourself and think more about everybody else. Because if everybody else fails, no matter how well off you may be, you will eventually fail. And this is the main reason why in Africa we're ridden with conflict. Because we see inequality in our midst. We see disadvantage in our midst. But we ignore it and pretend that life can go on. Now that is a sign of a lack of integrity. You may be very straight, you may be very honest, but if you don't understand your own social construct, then you don't necessarily have integrity. Because as I said, integrity is a whole. It's about you feeling you belong to the whole and you want the whole to work. And any part of that whole that doesn't work, well, challenges your own integrity. And you therefore need to have that in mind every time you speak about integrity. Now again, Another place where you can assess integrity is power. The question of power. And it doesn't matter whether it's the use of power, the effects of power, and how you communicate power. Now, again, a very good example of this is a few years back, the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring started by a fruit seller setting himself alive in Tunisia. Now, for me, that's a strong issue of integrity. Here is a guy who has been struggling selling fruits, trying to survive, and realizes that through hard work, through honesty, he can't survive. So he decided to communicate a message. Unfortunate as it may seem, but that was the only way he thought. But the moment he did that, millions of people identified with it. What does that tell you? It told you that the power to change was with the people who up until that point did not realize their power. But the moment he set himself alive, everybody connected. And there was massive change. And no matter what levels of integrity you had as a vice president or a minister at the time, it swept you away. Which then meant the integrity question is much broader than oneself and how you go about it. It's about understanding that it's an entire social construct. And you always need to recognize that. You always need to understand. I mean, it may not get you the benefits. It may not get you the results. But what it does, it gets you the role model identity. So everybody wants to aspire to be like that, to behave like that. They may not necessarily do, but they will try. And the reason for that is because you have been constant in modeling the value, in your social responsibilities, in your individual responsibility, and in trying to build a collective. Now, it does not always get you where you want to go. And often you hear it. You hear, oh, this is the best person for this, but I might not necessarily support them, or I might not necessarily help them. You may not agree with the person. But what you can't disagree with is the principles and values that drive them. The identity they portray, the image they portray, and how they go about doing it. Now, as leaders, how do you then respond to the question of I have integrity? You respond by being part of the whole. You constantly situate yourself in a society, in a community, in a family, in a marriage. In whatever you are, you've got to be able to see the whole to be a person of integrity. It cannot be about you. You alone cannot stand out and be the person of integrity. It's got to be a collective. We've got to motion as a society, we've got to motion as a community to be able to build. And the reason that is important is the biggest international question today that everybody feels threatens the whole world. It's not security. It's not poverty necessarily. What do you think is the biggest question that everybody feels threatens the world today? Any guess?
Climate change.
Sorry?
Climate change.
No, inequality. Inequality is the biggest challenge of this world today. Climate change is a threat. It's a big threat. But the biggest singular threat the world faces is inequality. And that is because societies are pulling apart in significant ways. And the people who are working on questions of inequality are very few. And that is why the world is ridden with conflict, constant challenges. So integrity forces you down the road to a more equal society, to a more sustainable society, to a more balanced society. And that is the only sustainable way to live. Any other way, we will have challenges on an ongoing basis. And that is why questions of integrity are fundamental. You've got to be able to ask it as a collective, and you belonging to a collective, and seeing a we situation all of the time rather than an I situation. Because that becomes less threatening for yourself and less threatening for all of us as a community. I will stop there. Thank you very much.